The question we're addressing now is, if we're not in equilibrium in the money market, what will happen? Okay? We're going to use the example that is found in Figure 8 of Chapter 5. The quantity of money that the Fed is supplying is $300 billion. The equilibrium interest rate there is assumed to be 15%. Okay? And to help us think through what will happen if we're not in equilibrium, all we have to do is ask the question, what if the interest rate is higher than that or lower? What will that, what can we predict that will lead to? So let's say that the interest rate happens to be too high. It's up here at 25%. Okay? Think about what that implies about the current state of this market. So you look at the interest rate we're assuming, and you ask, what will the quantity demanded be? Which just means, how much money will people want to hold at that interest rate? What will the quantity supplied be? And then we compare the two. And so we read over to the demand curve. That gives us the quantity of money demanded at that high interest rate, and it is assumed to be 100 billion. Okay? Since interest rates on bonds are high, bonds look attractive at this given this interest rate. So people want to hold a lot of bonds. They don't want to hold a lot of money. But to know if this is equilibrium, we have to ask, well, how much money will be available? And since the Fed has chosen to supply 300 billion, that means at the 25% interest rate, the quantity supplied will be 300 billion. So if quantity supplied is 300, quantity demanded is 100, clearly quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. We have a surplus or excess supply in what market? In the money market. Okay? Now you can see that if the interest rate falls, then we'll move in the direction of the equilibrium interest rate. But the question is, why should the interest rate fall? Is there somebody who's out there monitoring the money market, and they say, oh, people don't want to hold as much as the Fed is supplying, so we need to cut interest rates? Now, certainly your bank is not doing that. No, there's nobody who is trying to figure out, is there excess supply or demand in the money market? So we need to look at what we have here and think about what it implies about the other markets. In the liquidity preference framework, people have two ways of holding their wealth, money or bonds. We now know that if the interest rate is 25%, there will be excess supply in the money market. Think back to the previous segment, or the segment before that. If we have an excess supply in the money market, what does that tell you about the bond market? That's excess supply in one means we must have excess demand in the other. Let's have excess demand in the bond market. Think about it like this. With high interest rates, people, they look at their money holdings, they look at their bond holdings, they say, wow, bonds look really attractive. They say, I'm holding more money than I really want to hold, given how attractive bonds are. So people decide, because of the high interest rate on bonds, they decide, I'm going to take some of my money holdings, and I'm going to use those to purchase more bonds. Okay? That's how people will change their behavior when the interest rate is really high here. They're going to cut back. What they want to do is cut back on their money holdings and use those monies to purchase more bonds. But think about what happens in the bond market. As people start trying to buy more bonds, what happens to the price of bonds? As you have an excess demand in the bond market, what does excess demand do to the price of a product? Well, clearly, with excess demand of anything, the price is going to go up. So, the excess supply we see here in the money market implies excess demand in the bond market. That implies the price of bonds will do what? The price of bonds will be pushed up as bond holders are competing for the bonds that are available. It's that competition between bondholders to get the bonds that they want. That's what's causing bond prices to go up. And if bond prices are going up, we know from Chapter 4 what that implies about interest rates. Higher bond prices mean lower interest rates. Intuitively, why is that true? Because if you think back to our simple $1,000 discount bond, if you have to pay more to get that $1,000 bond, then it's not as good of a deal. If you're having to pay more then to get that same $1,000 bond, then the rate of return you get on your investment is going to be lower. So, summarizing, the interest rate is above the equilibrium level. You've got excess supply in the money market, which implies excess demand in the bond market, which will lead to competition for bonds, which pushes bond prices up. And when bond prices go up, interest rates go down. Okay? So this will happen if the interest rate is up at 25%. Now think about, as the interest rate falls, what occurs? As the interest rate goes down, what's happening to the opportunity cost of holding money? At 25% interest, bonds are paying really high interest rate. The opportunity cost of holding money is really high. But as the interest rate on bonds goes down, the opportunity cost of holding money goes down. Bonds aren't as attractive. And people decide, well, we don't want to hold just $100 billion since the lower interest rate is making bonds less attractive. People decide they do want to hold more than $100 million. Okay? The lower interest rate is motivating people to choose to hold more money. Now, how far is the interest rate going to drop? Well, the interest rate is going to keep dropping as long as the price of bonds keeps going up. This will happen as long as there's excess demand in the bond market. Well, how long will this be true? This will be true as long as there's excess supply in the money market. And we're going to have excess supply in the money market as long as the interest rate is above the equilibrium level. Okay? So interest rates started at 25, they drop, 24, 23, 20, they keep going down until the interest rate hits 15%. Once the interest rate hits 15%, the quantity of money demanded will have increased to $300 billion. Notice something very interesting here. The Fed decided to produce $300 billion. Does the Fed, well, they decided to pursue policies which would cause $300 billion worth of money to be available in the economy? Does the Fed force anybody to hold more money than they want? No. Everybody gets to hold the amount of money they want. They get to hold the amount of bonds that they want. Okay? Notice what happens. The Fed wants them to hold $300 billion. How much do they end up holding? Exactly $300 billion. People end up wanting to hold exactly the amount of money that the Federal Reserve has chosen to supply. How can that happen? Well, because once the Fed decides how much to make available, the interest rate is the adjusting mechanism. The interest rate will adjust. The interest rate will go to whatever level is required to induce people to hold the amount of money that the Fed wants them to hold. Okay? So nobody's forced to hold more money than they want, but the interest rate will adjust so that people will want to hold the amount that the Fed is making available. Okay? What if the interest rate were too low? Okay? We'll consider that in a moment.